So, welcome everyone. I'm very happy to see this small but very good group of people who are all very passionate and interested in this topic. Is how we're going to live together in old age. Certainly, this is a topic that we ask ourselves more and more about solutions. And of course, this comes in the midst of a big discussion about housing in general. So I'm very happy to see colleagues who are busy with different aspects of housing here at the faculty, and also practitioners, students, different people working in different sectors, and also from different countries. This is an international seminar where we want to learn from each other. We have three fantastic presentations on different pieces of research that we have done, one at the TU Delft, in cooperation with the municipality of Delft, and two from abroad, Denmark and Sweden, which are countries where I've been visiting and researching for quite some time now. And I'm very pleased to have made some good friends there. One of them is Kerstin, initiator and resident and researcher and long-time advocate for co-housing forums for elderly people, well, and for everybody. Thank you for being here today, Kerstin. And then we have Jesper from Denmark, who's also doing some interesting work. We're going to hear about that later. And well, the range of panelists who've also been busy with this topic in the last years. And I must say that this event we have today is like a spin-off of another very interesting program that we hosted at the faculty a year ago, Project Together. As many of you might know, might remember, because you were here as well. We had a fantastic range of activities, seminars, workshops, and also field trips to examples of co-housing, cooperative housing, CPOs, as we call them here in the Netherlands, the wide range of forms where not only seniors, but also different generations of people find a community-led living an answer for the different challenges that they are facing. So this event today is really focusing, as you know, on the question of old age and what are the advantages that living like this can have for many people, for society, and certainly the ways we can try to create more flow in the market, as we call it here in the Netherlands, the doorstorming discussion that we know from conversations with friends in Scandinavian countries. This is also an issue, how to shake up the housing market and try to get the people in the big houses to move to smaller houses, and so that's to make more room for the families to move in these family properties. And while it's not easy, as we will hear also from Marije and Stephanie, we did a small piece of action research with elderly residents in Tandhof, and we try to see to what extent we can convince people that other ways of living are possible. So in a nutshell, well, we're going to hear about all these exciting ideas, and I would really like us to have a lively discussion at the end to see how we can move forward the agenda for the Netherlands, but also on a European level. I'm also very happy to have here Peter Boerhouwer, who is a colleague and the chair of the ENHR. And I'm very excited to say that in 2 years' time, or a year and a half, we're going to host here in Delft the next ENHR conference. And perhaps this is a topic that we can also resume a nice discussion in our country and invite people from abroad to shed light on that. So I leave you with that. And the program is very simple. After this introduction, we have the presentation by Stephanie and Marije about the research I mentioned. You're going to have, how much time do you need? 15 minutes? 15, 20 minutes, yeah, and then 10 minutes for questions and answers to them. That will be followed by Kerstin from Sweden, the same idea. So overall, half an hour, including presentation and questions. And then it's Jesper's turn, after which we have a small coffee break. And then we will have a discussion with our panelists. I will then introduce them, each of them to you. And we will integrate, of course, questions from the rest of you. From some practical details. A lot of people who wanted to be here, they cannot be here for work commitments or whatever. And they asked, oh, is this going to be available, to watch later? So we decided at the last minute, yes, we will record this. We are already recording it. I hope that's okay with everyone to Yes, if you have strong objections, speak now or stay silent forever. I hope that's not the problem. And the other thing is that we want to create a small briefing, like an executive summary with the highlights of the discussion, and also have it in English and in Dutch to distribute to people who are interested in this topic. So we want to create an impact, not only to have a discussion between these walls, but also to spread the word to the wider world. Okay, so without further ado, I give you the floor. So you're going to speak from here?
Yes.
Yes.
So, hi everyone. So I'm Marije Peuten, Darinka already introduced me. And I'm a researcher, part of the CoLab research group founded by Darinka. And today, together with Stephanie, who is an architect at INBO, we will present our research living together in old age. Yes, so I will start by giving a little bit of a background, and Darinka already introduced the project together, but I will elaborate a little bit more on the process that went beforehand and our initial aims. And then I will share with you the methods that we applied and the general findings we found, and then Stephanie will go more into how she translated more social scientific data to design interventions and how we also work together to get to these results. Yes, so to start with, not to forget, this project has been funded by Creative Industries Netherlands, and we also cooperated with Meerte Sietsma, who's sitting there, when she was still working for the municipality of Delft. She's now working for Platform 31. Congratulations. Yes, so Project Together was founded by Darinka Cieske with the aim to connect more academic debates on collaborative housing to societal impact in the Netherlands, specifically in the Netherlands. It's a collaboration between societal partners and the university. And as a part of this project, we started to brainstorm about the idea to actually realize a housing pilot in Delft and to be able to experiment with new ways of living and also to see what kind of governance structures would be needed to enable more projects like that, because in Delft this is still quite a struggle for a lot of initiatives. And then we found funding through the creative industries. And we started also talking about with the municipality, like what kind of issues do we actually want to tackle with a housing pilot in Delft. And a recurring topic was housing the aging population in the city. Because there's in Delft has a very high population of students, which is constantly increasing. So a large part of the new housing stock is actually destined for the target group students. And at the same time, the population is also rapidly aging. And I think I already said that, but that makes it very hard for example, families and starters to remain living in Delft. While there is the right housing stock, but this is currently not really used in a most optimal way. So instead of like thinking from a more governance perspective, like, oh, we want to move elderly out to somewhere else, we started more exploring like how do they actually live in Delft now? What are their housing needs? What are their struggles? Do they have any like aspirations to move or not? And if they do, what would help them, facilitate them to make this step? Yes, so that's more of the background of the project. Yeah, and so as a neighborhood, we decided to research in Tandpost, which is located in the south part of Delft. It's also the neighborhood with the highest population of elderly. So we found this for like such a short action research an interesting case, because it's actually very exemplary of this population. It's also quite an old neighborhood, so a lot of people who are still living there have moved there when they had families themselves. So they can also understand that these dwellings are really suitable for families because they actually experience that. So a lot of people feel very engaged with this discussion on housing. So we formulated the research question: how can co-creation help to understand housing needs of elderly people? So we were not just looking for to map out the housing needs, but also to experiment with what kind of methods would help in having more of a dialogue with citizens, to enable more to empower their voices also in urban planning. And now I will briefly summarize the more theoretical framework. I'm sure that some of you are very familiar with this, so maybe it's a little bit repetitive, but as we all know, we're in a housing crisis in the Netherlands as well as other European countries. And at the same time, national governments are also faced with rising costs for care. So that puts them in a difficult position, because they need to reduce the care cost, and a lot of policy is doing that right now by through the activation and individualization of care, which means that elderly are required to actually organize their own care, and aging in place, for example, is really stimulating elderly also to remain living at home instead of care centers, for example. And at the same time, the housing stock is not always facilitating this move, right? So at the same time, policy is also looking for what can senior-friendly housing look like, and how can we stimulate this growth and development in new development areas. By other scholars, collaborative housing has been studied as an attractive alternative that could potentially provide more affordability, but also especially more quality, a social safety net for people. People can also organize their care together instead of alone, making it more efficient and cheaper. So we were also curious, would this solution apply for Delft as well, and then particularly elderly in Tantov? Yes, so something about the methods that we used. So we used both social scientific methods. We combined more social science methods with participatory design methods. So amongst the social scientific methods are in-depth interviews, field work, for example, a mental mapping exercise. We asked people to draw their surroundings and to show us what kind of routines they had in the neighborhood. But we also tried to experiment with more participatory design method, because we wanted to have something concrete as an outcome, and not just ideas about what people wanted, but actual solutions to inform urban planning processes. And to do that, Stephanie and I were quite open. We didn't really know in advance what we were going to do. So we were also very connected in our ways of working. For example, I shared with Stephanie that a lot of people didn't really know collaborative housing as a concept. So that made us decide to actually to not organize a more typical informatieavond kind of thing in a cafe, because people would not actually be attracted to that because they would not actually know what it's about. But instead of that, we organized a housing excursion to visit 3 different projects in Delft. So to see what kind of reactions people would have, and also to have different, more detailed kind of knowledge about what kind of design people would find attractive. And this for us was actually one of the biggest successes of the project, if I dare say, because it was quite transformative for people. They had never actually seen people living in this way, and for all of them it was very inspiring. Whereas they were a little bit ambiguous beforehand, they were completely, they all wanted to live in one of those projects afterwards. So
different ones as well. You could see that different people were attracted to a different kind of
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
A lot of misconceptions about living in apartments, that it would be super noisy because I lived in an apartment 40 years ago, And
Yeah.
you would build differently back then.
Yeah,
Kind of
exactly.
examples.
Yeah, and not just about collaborative housing, but also apartments. Because people are so used to living in this big dwelling with a garden that they had all these ideas of what it would be like to live in an apartment block. And once they visited these apartments, because many of them maybe also didn't have the right friends who lived in apartments in a comfortable way, right? So you just usually what you don't know or what you have never seen is difficult to imagine. And this enabled people to actually dream about something that they weren't familiar with before. Yeah, so for us, this was definitely a nice outcome of it being a little bit more open and experimental. And also to create more dialogue with citizens and to give something back. Like for them, this was also a really nice and transformative experience. Yeah, so some general findings. I mean, as you could see, this is action research, so it's very exploratory. We cannot make any rigorous conclusions out of this, but I still think it's nice to give a little bit of an idea what kind of things we found and heard. So in general, the elderly living in Tandhof are very satisfied with their dwelling and neighborhood. They find it really comfortable. They like their neighbors. They feel really familiar with the neighborhood. At the same time, there were also people who started or struggle with maintaining their big house, or who experienced something that really changed their life and that made them also look in a different way at the future. And that really made them reconsider, like, what do I actually want in my life and how do I want to live the last phase. For example, when people lost a partner, when they had an accident and it had a decreased mobility. And in these cases, people started exploring alternatives. And what they found was that there was a big lack of attractive alternatives in Delft. So a lot of people felt stuck because they didn't really feel like they could make a decision. They had the opportunity to actually change their own situation when they also encountered the limitations of their own dwelling. And this was not just in terms of like health measures, because very often senior-friendly housing is defined in a very health-related way, for example, by the width of doors. But we found that people more often focus on atmosphere and the experience. For example, having a view is really important. So these kind of more soft features for us that was also a big outcome. That these are actually more important for people when they make a decision to move than the doors or the toilet. And we also found big inequalities amongst elderly. So people who had more financial and social capital were less worried when they were going through this phase, like, oh, maybe I want to move. They saw it as a fun exercise. Whereas people who had less financial or social capital felt quite desperate and powerless because they didn't feel like they could change their own situation for the better. And these were also precisely the people that knew less about collaborative housing, but were also more enthusiastic about it. So for us, this is quite interesting because it showed us that potentially this could be a very attractive alternative, but it's not yet either accessible or affordable for a group that could benefit from it. Yeah, so to make way also for Stephanie's more positive part of the presentation, what do people actually want? What makes an attractive dwelling or neighborhood? Well, we found, I kind of said it already, but like a very spacious feeling is important. Large windows and not like a closed balcony, but an open balcony, so you can have a view on the street and see what's going on, have something interesting also to look at, because people spend more and more time also at home. Not everyone, but some of them. So then it's important to have something nice to look at. A good energy label for the monthly costs, a guest room for grandchildren, a garden or a balcony, very important because they're now used to having a balcony, a garden. I mean. In the neighborhood, greenery is important because people like to be outside and stay fit, or at least the people that we talk to. a mix of generations to make it more lively, and then a very important shared amenity that people would really like to share is a library. Everyone visits the library very often, but there's no library in the neighborhood right now. So they actually have to travel to get to the library. So this for us was something that they would really love to see that in the Plinth, for example, on the ground floor. A gym, because people like to do sports and stay fit in old age. Well, venue space, little coffee bar, or a garden, a communal garden. Yes, so can you say
yes? Yeah, so, oops. So in terms of outputs, we had kind of two basic outputs that we wanted to generate. We wanted to generate kind of general features that elderly in Tantof wanted, and kind of design input in general that you could implement into projects. And then we would also, our aim was also to implement those into specific case studies, 3 different locations in Delft where we could implement those, that design input and show potential future developers how the housing demands of elderly in Tantof could be incorporated into their designs. I'll show the cases in a bit, but this is the general input. And you already briefly explained, but this is a more visual approach to it. So our idea was to basically make one image on 3 different scales that explained a bit these principles. So, for instance, you can see that on the bottom right. Oh, I can point.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Also, the proximity of the train station was important. I'll just explain a bit more the things that you haven't elaborated on. And for instance, one really important thing that I think is very Tantof specific is the location between the city and green. So this kind of bike proximity to the city, but also really close by the green areas where they could exercise in a very easy way. And also this demand for having small facilities close by, services that are more small scale and more local, but then a bigger supermarket could be a bit further away. In terms of the building scale, so this was the neighborhood scale, the building scale, we found that people on one hand, they really value this kind of view. They want to have a view on the water or on green areas. They found this very important, but there were also people who said they preferred to be a bit more on the lower levels of the building, to have a bit more contact with the neighborhood. So that was also interesting to see this difference, which makes it ideal to accommodate a larger group, because there have to be these differences. If everybody wants to have the penthouse view, then it's hard to make an apartment building for elderly. And also this idea of having a shared garden instead of your own garden, or maybe a smaller private garden connected to a larger collective garden where they could meet quite informally. They mentioned that it would not be very heavily used, but then for events, birthday parties, or maybe a barbecue. And then also connected to that, very important, is a collective space, like more multifunctional space. It is both connected to the street and to the collective garden. So that's like a very concrete input that you could work with. And also actually the idea of shared mobility was quite welcomed by at least like half of the people we spoke to. And then in terms of the apartment or house itself, I found it very interesting that people actually are quite realistic about the size of their future apartment. They did not expect to have 100 plus square meters. But they said it's important that they could use it quite flexibly. So to have a bit more flexibility in where you can sit, where you can eat, where is your kitchen. I mean, the kitchen is fixed, but then to have also the second bedroom, for instance, connected to the living room with sliding doors, so you could open up that space so it could be more multifunctional. And for instance, also this idea of having a more closed balcony, because an open balcony that is sticking out, you can only use it for 3 months or bit more of the year, and if you would have the possibility to close it, people could use it as a hobby space, for instance.
And maybe the gallery is also important too.
The gallery was also interesting because we visited a project in more the north part of Delft, where they had a very wide gallery, and people, found this very interesting to be able to put a bench out in front of their kitchen window to make a nice little area with plants. So that they valued that very positively, while you would expect that maybe that's perceived as a more necessary way of making it feasible. So we had these like kind of 3 scales of input, and the idea was also to look at 3 different locations with very different scales throughout Delft, where in the next 1 to 10 years there would be actual developments happening, and to have so to translate that general input into something more specific to that site. So if you see the 3 different projects, one is New Delft, close to the station in the center. The design guidelines basically say that you're in a closed building block, that's this one, more or less 6 to 7 layers, and that those plots will also be given out to initiative groups who form themselves and then develop the project together. So that's also a very realistic case for elderly to possibly live it, but they would have to organize themselves. And this was also one of the outcomes that we found, that people don't actually know that much about these kind of projects, at least people in Tanthof. So that would be also a good step to inform them more and to help them a bit in this process. And second one is Delft Campus. Bigger area, but it will be developed a bit later on. But you can see that it also kind of relates to the Schiehoefers development, and that's quite large scale. So that would at least have a sort of high-rise or mid-rise component, but also connecting to the neighborhood. It's really on the edge of Tanthof, so you could have a bit of a combination of a higher building with something that relates more to the scale of the more like the individual house scale. And then in the center of Tanthof, there is also a future location that will be developed. It's a bit unclear about the timeline of that, but that would fit probably a more small scale, low rise, and more obvious courtyard typology. So that's why we thought it would be interesting to actually show these 3 and see also how people would react to those 3 typologies. And what we found is actually that there's a big range of housing demands from people. We had a little stand at the information market in Tanthof. It was an event organized by the municipality, and we could kind of do our little session there. And there was a huge interest, and actually we found that different people found different projects interesting, but there was this huge enthusiasm, and they were like, "Oh, when is it going to be built?" You know, and it's not going to be built yet, but this is how it would look, and we were really positively surprised by that. And I will not explain the 3 cases, but maybe it's interesting to just have a look at kind of the level that we went into for the 3 different cases. So this is the New Delft project. I would say that most people in Delft-Tanthof found New Delft a bit too urban, but some of them are really interested in it. But what they mostly mentioned is that the apartments that are being built there are like really big, quite expensive, and not within their kind of range of possibilities. So we studied on a more kind of efficient typology where you would have a bit smaller dwellings. So 3-room apartments, very similar to the kind of the scheme that I showed before, with a gallery that allowed for some space to be also inhabited by them. So a bit larger than the minimum, and then to have kind of balconies incorporated into their apartments that they could use also as a winter garden. And what was an important lesson that we didn't apply all the principles in all the cases, because this is not a scale where you can fit an entire library, for instance. That we did implement that into the Delft campus building, for instance, in the plinth, because it's a large scale development where you could house such a function. But here, for instance, we chose to make a shared kitchen here. You can see it here next to the collective garden. This is the collective garden. It's kind of a strip where you could have different functions, like a big picnic table or like a vegetable garden. And we would make just a quite small but big, large enough shared space with a nice kitchen, a long table where everybody could meet. So scale of about 20 apartments. So that would be feasible. And yeah, so we asked for the input of the residents on Sunday. And yeah, they quite like this this idea. And they mentioned really smartly, maybe you should make a staircase there because it's not very accessible. Yeah, that's a fair point. So it's really good to, I mean, it's very basic stuff, but it's really good to get their input on that. So this is a bit of a mix of the academic and design. So please also fill in what you wanted to mention. But yeah, what we found is that this kind of design methods, they're very open-ended. You're kind of always adjusting what you're doing, and you kind of have to be a bit more open to exploring new methods and just see what happens and then move further. And I think in this relatively short time, we did a lot of different experiments and we got a lot of input on that. And it's really important to have accessible research outputs. So the way that you show your research, the way that these design principles, it's really important that they are understandable for them as well, for non-professionals. And you have to use these experimental methods, or at least we found that they're very useful to think a bit outside of the box, not to have like just a questionnaire or yeah, to just have the discussion, because the discussion also helps them to think more about how they want to live.
Yeah, maybe also too, I think that what I often find when I don't work with visual data and just have a conversation, it's sometimes difficult to talk about space because that's actually a very different way of thinking, and it really helps then to have visuals, for example, design to discuss space, because otherwise it remains really abstract for people. So I think that's one of the things that I really like collaborating together.
Yeah.
Is that this like thinking in a more designy visual way also helps to have different conversations with people and different outputs for academic outputs. Yeah.
Yeah, and then to get the social innovation in housing, it's really important to inform the policy of the citizen perspective. Maybe you can elaborate a bit.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so like an ongoing thing is that we're trying to really give this back also to policy measures, and so we're always like we're very good connected with the municipality of Delft, and there's also one of the project leaders is here right now, which is great because I think that these kind of retangible outputs can also help to think in a different way about urban planning. So yeah, that's something that we're doing. That's an ongoing thing for us. And then hopefully also we will maybe realize how to apply that in the future. That would be great. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, we're gonna
because now there's about 8 to 10 minutes question time. If you have any questions on the project for Mariah and Stephanie, and well, we have also Mette here who was part of the team from the municipality. She's no longer working there, but of course she has a lot of knowledge that she might want to share with us. Shall we maybe start with you? What is your question? Months after?
Yeah. Well, I was very happy with the project because I think it's very important to also involve the people who are going to live in social housing forms, to really talk to them and know what they want. So I think that's a very important job also for the municipality, just to explore what do the citizens want. And I think most important lesson maybe is that, a lot of people don't really know what are the options. Of course, there are options to live together as elderly people, but also mixed forms. And I think there are a lot of apartments already built here in Delft, which are also accessible for elderly. But well, what we noticed is that not everybody knows about these projects. So I think, well, one of the outcomes would be that for us, well, not anymore for me, but for the municipality, it's important to inform people and also to ask what they really want and what they are looking for. And well, people are very different. So I think it's important that we have several projects within the city for different kind of people. Mixed, but also especially for elderly. So I think that's one of the most important lessons for the municipality. Yes.
Do we have someone who is now from the municipality here? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
We have it.
Yes, Norm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a project manager for the municipality and I work on the New Delta project.
All right.
So we have some space for I knew this project already.
That's great. So do you think we can continue on this line of work with the municipality? Is it something that your colleagues regard as contributing to their thinking?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not from the department. Yeah, but she said I'm from the Delta part. And I just wrote down what how do we get to those people, because we have a lot of self-building project online. Definitely want some space for people. How do they get to know that?
Great. We have an open line for communication in the future. And anybody else that has any questions on any aspect, also the methods or the approach we used? Also, Maja, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for this inspiring presentation. I have a question about one of the slides of you, Marije, but maybe also for Stephanie and Berthe. You say there is a mismatch between policy and experience.
Yes.
And I'm curious, can you tell a bit more about this mismatch and maybe also suggestions to overcome the mismatch?
Yeah. Should I give an answer or do we want to have all the questions? Okay. Yes, so what I meant by that is that the term senior friendly housing is very often understood more in terms of health related measures. So this is what I meant with a mismatch, whereas elderly themselves are more focused on experience and not so much on health related. They're not going to check like the width of the doors when they visit an apartment, right? So they're more interested in like having, for example, corridors where you can meet others, because they now meet their neighbors all everywhere. So, for example, one of them, maybe it's good to give an example. One resident, she knew someone in an apartment, and it was very dark there, and she didn't know anyone in the apartment block. And this was for her a reference of what it's like to live in an apartment. So she said, like, well, I don't really like to move in this apartment where it's just really dark and where you cannot meet anyone or you don't know anyone and where nobody's really looking out for you. And this, so it's in that sense, it's also about designing good communal spaces, the right kind of corridors, and so that's what I meant with a mismatch. Is that in policy, this is quite difficult also, right? To actually translate these really soft features to concrete policy measures. And I think that maybe it's up to also the project leaders and the project managers when they receive proposals for tenders, that they also judge it in that way, you know, to what extent an architect is able to make that thinking, to do that thinking, and to be more critical in that part of the process. So not so much perhaps in a wider housing policy, but more like project-based, so that project managers of different area developments are aware of how different target groups think about quality, what kind of qualities they appreciate, and then the more general qualities, right? Not the specific. Maybe that is quite challenging because we also mentioned like it's very diverse. So how are we going to communicate that to everyone at the municipality? But that's a way I think that could be translated to policy measures.
I think also that simply getting the future residents involved helps.
Yeah.
It really makes the chances of them moving, makes them larger, because it doesn't mean that actually their demands are being directly translated into the designs, but actually getting them connected to the project, getting them committed is already helping the process.
And maybe that's also part of the communication thing, right? It's that it should be communicated when it's already finished. It should be like a process that's co-creational with residents throughout. So yeah, right.
As early as possible.
As early as possible.
Yeah. That's why I think it would be super nice if we could, like actually go back to Tanthof, and now it's half a year later, and then say, hey, this is what's coming up now. To keep them attached. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, very nice. We know that people are very much attached to their old neighborhoods, especially seniors. So do you think that if you would organize this kind of projects, there would be completely there would be different outcomes? And I think it's very positive that even people from Tanthof are actually thinking about living in these more urban environments. I think there will be huge differences if you concentrate on other groups. So maybe you should. So the first question is: do you agree with me? And should we not also look at more, other areas in which people have different backgrounds?
Yeah. I did a similar project in Rotterdam.
Yeah, okay.
In Alexander.
Yeah.
Before this, actually, and what we found, actually, there are quite big differences
Yeah.
between what people want there and what people want in Tanthof. So
I can
that
imagine.
really proves that you should do this really very locally. If you want to develop a project, at least in one city, you should do your research there, and you should do it again and again, because it's not a super heavy. There was some time invested, of course, but it's not like you have to invest years and years of time, but to do like an initial research. Because, for instance, in Alexander and Rotterdam, people were much more individualistic. People didn't need so much shared space. They preferred to have their own space. They didn't need like a specific meeting place. And people are already much more used to living in apartments. So they said, I don't see the need to move. Okay, maybe it would be nice to have a bit more interaction in my building, but maybe I should organize some more activities myself with my gallery, like my level. Yeah.
So we should be very careful with this general conclusions.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Now, these are, let's say, general conclusions for self-taught design principles, and not for, because I think that's one of the problems now. If you look at what I design as an architect in more general projects, we say, oh, elderly want this, but that's that's not really how it works.
We need to ask the people in the specific places. That's one of our main general conclusions, basically. We need to go back to the local level, and the answers will be different.
I'm going to start a new project in Bergen op Zoom, and I'm going to do the same again, like asking like a panel at least to how do you want to live, and it's a similar situation, people living in these individual houses. Yeah.
Well, actually, I'm very much interested in the methods, because they could be general.
Yeah.
So that you have kind of guidelines how to deal with these neighborhoods. Speaking about the methods, this mental maps and interviews and so on, the outcome, I think, is different in every city or neighborhood or village, but perhaps it's even more interesting to develop booklets or something about how to approach people themselves.
Maybe it's interesting what you found in the interviews is that it became kind of a network. So it was really hard to find the initial people to do the interviews with, but then you expanded kind of the network.
Yeah, we definitely apply the snowballing method. So at first we just started ringing people just door by door, and also through the network of Mirta, because she actually lives in which was great. And then we followed up with people like, do you know any other people who'd be interested in cooperating as well? And that's how it spread. And that's also how we got quite a diverse group of residents, which was great, like to the extent that Tantalf is diverse. To the extent of the diversity that's there is quite diverse. So, but it's a great idea to actually make this like, yeah,
how to start.
how to start. Yeah.
I do this work with students, right? And we have last course, you have been in Mumbai. And the students are very creative how to get to know the people. They look for where's a good house and they cook with them and they play with them and so this approach of how to meet the people, how to get to know the people, I think is very, very important. And the outcome we will see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we need to move on now. Thank you very much, Stephanie and Maria. And of course, we can come back later on in the general discussion to the method, which I think is the main learning that we have from this project more in general. Kerstin, your turn now. You have your presentation on screen and yeah.
I'm Kerstin Kärnekud from Sweden and Stockholm. And I'm going to present a project where I live since almost 30 years. And it's actually like a laboratory for senior housing. I think that what I'm going to show you is an example of what seniors can do together if they have the possibility. Not everybody wants to live like this, but I think that it's something that you can learn from. And we are very open to study visits because we think it's so important to show other seniors what possibilities there are. And then they can take an interest in doing something together the same way as those who founded this project did many, many years ago. I was not a part of the starting group from the beginning, but I have been engaged in questions about co-housing in Sweden for quite a few years. We were starting our discussions about an alternative to those big collective housing projects that were existed in Sweden. We were wanting something more small scale and not with the paid people cooking dinners, but doing things together. And when trying to form this idea, we went to Denmark and realized that they already had done what we were planning to do. So we have learned, of course, a lot of Denmark. But it's almost 30 years old. And this is the basic ideas behind the project. We call it a small project, but because in those days, in the 1970s, a project has to be at least 100 to 300 flats and common spaces and paid services. And we wanted something more simple, smaller, more easy to achieve. And we thought that we don't need two big spaces to live in, personal, individual spaces, if we also have common spaces. So we can take some square meters from our flats and put them together and then get so much more. So that was a very simple idea. It wouldn't cost more because we would live on the same area, but we would share parts of it. We should share common tasks instead of paying people to do it. And we would save resources and energy. And of course, when we started with these ideas. We were much younger and we had children. So we thought that this would be the best way for children to grow up with lots of grown-ups around them, not only the one father and one mother, but so many grown-ups, like a small community. And now we realize that this also is a good way of living for seniors. And since we started in the late 1970s, there has been quite a few projects in Sweden, and it looks massive if you see it on a map like this, but actually it has been a very slow process, taking a lot of time. And one very important thing is to have engaged people forming starting groups, trying to persuade the municipality and the housing organizations to build these new kind of projects. And that's a very slow process. And then to find financing and all other things. You know also a lot about the problems. And as so many good ideas, it started at the kitchen table. A few people sitting down discussing what will happen when we are getting older. In Sweden in those days, we knew that the population would diminish and that there would not be enough people to take care of us when we grow older. So it was important to find new ways of solving this. Being able to move from, most of us lived in bigger flats to smaller ones, leaving them to our children. Another important thing was to find ways of making people realize that it was a good idea to move when you are quite young. We were talking about the second half of life, and that begins when you are 40. And in those days, we had grown up children when we were 45. That's different today, of course, because people choose to have babies later. But this was a long process when this group was forming, growing, finding. They contacted almost every property owner in Stockholm to find someone interested in planning together with them. And they at last found a municipal housing company who said yes. And the important thing was that there was a political decision in Stockholm that the municipal housing companies should build co-housing. So you need to have also the politicians engaged to make these things happen. So that was why this municipal housing company actually was interested. It took 5 years to form this, or perhaps even six years, a bit too long time. But on the other side, you also need to talk, to get to know one another, to form the idea, so you can find more people who are interested in the same idea. So you need that process to work together. And in this situation, there was also a possibility, a small grant that made it possible for the architect to spend more time than usual with the tenants to be. And so there was an intense discussion between the group and the architect and the housing company. And the group educated itself by doing study visits to different projects in Stockholm and other places, and to learn from others. So it was really a thorough research behind these projects from the tenants. And after 5-6 years, it was finished and we could move in. And by that time, I also was a member of the group And there were 43 flats and lots of common spaces. Very well planned and designed because the tenants knew what was important. They had learned that during the process. And it's about openness, flexibility, that you can see what's going on in the common spaces in a very natural way. You pass them, so you see if someone is active or passive, sitting somewhere, and you have a possibility to stop and exchange a few words. All those things are so important. And this is the ground floor of the building. It's not so easy perhaps to see, but there are two entrances, one in head entrances, and there are two stairways. So you can also find another entrance to pass without passing the central room where everything is possible to understand. You can see the common room, you can see the dining room, you can fetch your post, you meet your neighbors, and it's so important with those simple meetings you do when you just move through your building. We are like 58 tenants at the moment, between 60 and 90. From the beginning, we were between 40 and 80 or 85. But as I say, you are old later nowadays than you were when I was younger, so people are not interested in moving into this building before they are like 55, 60. And what we do, because we can suggest, and this is a tenancy, so we are tenant, and we actually have no right to decide anything, and we decide a lot. But we also suggest to the housing company who will be the next tenant. And we have discussed this so many times and very thoroughly. And it's what the house needs. And what does the house need? Young people in the 60s or 50s. It needs couples in the bigger flats, so the 3-room flats. If there are couples interested in moving in, they get the bigger flats. And we are also actually favorizing men because it's important to have at least a good part of men. We have like 1/3 are men, but men are shy. They are not so interested in doing dangerous things like moving into co-housing projects. So you really have to help them. And what we realize that if they come to a study visit and see what's going on and meet other men, then it's more easy for them to say yes to move into this building, because it's often their wives who are interested and not so often the men. And so many single women are queuing, or we don't have a queue because we have members who are not living in the building. And you can't queue because we have to have this method of choosing who is going to move in from the younger ones, as I said. So it's quite a different system of how to find new tenants. And the Swedish way of doing this is to say that when you move in, you actually say yes to taking part in a few things, to cook dinner together, not every day, but every 6 weeks, 3 times. You are, if you can, you have to take part in the cooking or cleaning. And then you are free to come to eat any day. You don't have to, because you don't have to eat together, but you have to cook together. That's important. And we also take care of the garden and the common spaces together and some other things. So, and since we pay a rent, And in the rent is the care of gardens and common spaces included in the rent. We get some money back, not that much, but this money goes to our association. We have an association for people living in the house and people interested in moving in. But it's important for this association to have money to arrange things, to pay for newspapers and new books in the library and other things. Thank you. And this is a dinner. I think that between 30 and 50 persons are having dinner every day from Monday to Friday. And it's really cheap because we do all the cooking from the ground up. It's a lot chopping and a lot peeling you have to do. And we have lovely recipes that make it simple, step by step, so we understand how to do it. So it's not problematic to cook together, but it takes time to cook a lot of food for people. That's what you learn. And this is the meeting place I was talking about, the entrance to the building. From where lots of things are happening. There are small exhibitions, there's music, there are study groups being shown around and other things. And there are lots of notice boards because we have so many working groups, because we have separate working groups taking responsibility for separate parts of what's going on in the building. And then we have another notice boards for all the fun things and for the booking of the guest rooms, because we have 3 guest rooms. We can also use the common spaces to individually. If on weekends, for example, we don't have to pay for it because we pay all the cost for the common spaces as part of our rent. So we pay rent for our individual flats and some extra square meters. So it's our square meters. And the important thing is that we feel that this whole building is our home. As soon as we have entered that entrance door, we feel at home. And that's a fantastic thing. And we have also invented how you can use things together, individually or together. Because no one knew how to do this when we moved in. And of course, the first year was quite difficult. We had been talking and discussing and deciding upon the social structure of it. And that was very important. But then to go from ideas to reality had some problems, not so big. This is our common room, and you can see that from the common room, there are glass windows, so you see the entrance area, and everyone who comes into the building can see what's going on in the common room. And there are big windows to other common rooms too from the corridors, and that's an important design thing. And so we have a garden. And this garden we can use for many things, and it has been so important during the COVID-19 pandemic because we could meet outdoors during the whole period, at a distance, of course. And we don't have children living in the building, but we have children coming all the time. And this is about the garden being used in summer and in winter for birthday parties. Olga then was 95 years old, and we had her son arranged a party in December during the pandemic. Yes, this is about the COVID-19. We really, to have common spaces, to know one another, and to be used to take decisions together, made it possible to find new solutions during that period. And these are some of the lessons that we have made, and I have to read them like this. It's important to have this process before moving in, getting to know one another. You can actually, you don't need that much space when you have so much in common as we have. You need less space than you ever believe. And we are of course saving by living on fewer square meters. And doing things together is a way of keeping costs down, but it's also a very good way of getting to know one another. You don't have to love all your neighbors. You can't love all your neighbors, but you learn how to stand some of them. Because of course, there are so many different people and everybody is not your favorite. But when you work together, meet them often, you understand more about them and you accept them. And sometimes there may be someone that you have to keep at a real distance, but that's life. And to keep the vitality in a housing like this is important to have this variety of ages and to try to keep this mixture of young old and older old, young seniors and old, like me. and this to do things together is for us so important. It's a basis for getting to know one another, to keeping the spirits up, to learn. But what you do when you do live like this is to meet so many ideas, new ideas all the time. So you are always kept on your toes if you want to do that. But you get inspiration. And I saw an article from a Danish newspaper saying that living in their form of bofællesskab keeps you 10 years younger, or you can live for more than 10 years more. And I do think that we do live longer and we have more fun. Thank you.
And excellent timekeeping, by the way. So we have about 10 minutes for questions to Kerstin. Who would like to? Maybe you can say briefly who you are, and that goes for everybody.
Yeah, of course. Okay, yeah. Guido Rijkenveld of Group Nieuwsblad. Your housing initiative. And we're building first on but I have a question because it looks like I think it's great. It seems great to live over there. Your community within the house is also very strong. How is your relationship to the neighborhood?
Well, we are situated in the middle of Stockholm. And I think we have a good relation to our neighborhoods. We are inviting them once a year to come to visit us. And we are also engaged in lots of things. We have acquired with members coming from outside. We have people working as volunteers in our kitchen. So it's not only we who live in the building, but people are coming for every 6 weeks, either to cook or to wash the dishes. And they think that's interesting and they are coming. And we need them because some of us are getting older and we need that extra workforce. And we also get more inspiration from those neighbors. One interesting thing happened during an open house. One neighbor said, "Oh, do you have problems with your staff? You seem to have such a big turnover with people working in your kitchen. I always see different persons that." So that man hadn't realized that we did it ourselves together. It was gone, and we thought that we had a big problem. But we are not, our common spaces are not open to the neighbors only when they come invited or as guests, because these common spaces are part of our private area actually. And if we should have other spaces that were easy to keep avskilda, to keep separate, then it would be more easy to have open arrangement. And we do have it, but don't tell the authorities because there are those fire regulations and things. So you have to be very careful, actually.
Have another question?
Yeah, my name is Courtney Mount. I'm working for the Knauwenhof. It's also an initiative in the co-creation, building modern living for elderly people. And our first hofje, so it's for co-housing, is now open for 5 years. And we discovered that the group dynamics changes so much. So you try to organize and start some regulations, some structures, some groups and commissions and all that kind of stuff. But you try also to build a culture, some good understanding, some to be a good neighbor. Can you tell us more about the group dynamics in your house, because you're living there for so many years and we only for 5 years, and we are looking for the right amount of regulations and culture and to stay in dialogue. And I think maybe one of the key ingredients in your housing is the doing things together instead of talking, because when you start talking in relations, you can have a meeting every evening. But please, we want to tell something about it from your experience.
That's really important, the group dynamics. And since I think we are 11 out of 58 moving in for 30 years ago. So many new have moved into the building. They were new some years ago, and we have to introduce them to. So it's not only a question about the original group, it's a question of how to introduce new persons, to listen to them and stop them from changing everything. Because we only can live with actually quite small and slow changes, and we have to tell people that yes, we have a democratic way of doing things here, but this is democratic. If you are not a part of the majority, then you won't get what you want. You have to accept what other things is important. But also we have a very slow way of taking decisions because we don't want to rush things. We have to be, the question has to be mentioned. If we all need to feel that this is the moment to take a decision. We don't have to discuss it any longer. We know what everyone thinks. We can live with what the decision will be, and then we can continue with other things. But group dynamics is very important, and there are different methods in Sweden how you solve problems. We try to solve them ourselves, but you can also use someone from the outside. And I think it's very important for organizers to think about this. And the period before people move in and the first year is so important because then you form the culture. So it needs every help it can get, actually. And sometimes you have to find solutions like helping someone to move out who did move in, but you can't understand actually if this is something for me or not until you have tried it. At least when it's so unusual as it still is in Sweden, but because it is unusual. But I think that it's interesting as a way of understanding what people can do together when they take responsibility as we have done. But every house has its culture, but it's nice to have a history to lean back on, to tell people about the ideas behind it. Then you can change the ideas, but you have to know from where you are coming before you can change things in a good way.
Thank you so much.
So we have two more questions. Yeah.
And behind you, Darika.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Okay, so we have Birgit and Job, and then this one. Yes.
Shall I start?
Yes.
Birgit Jurgenhake, I work here as faculty chair of architecture dwelling and very much with housing elderly. My question would be, what about care? You're getting older and older. As you have said already, care costs are rising. How do you deal with informal care, helping each other? How far does this go?
Yes, you know, in Sweden we have a system with home care. So we are not taking over what home care does, but we do all the other things that home care can't do because it takes too much time or is expensive or is not part of what they are supposed to do. We do all those little things. We are there. We can do small errands. We help with if someone is ill, we take a tray with food up to that person as an example. And we also introduce those working at home care how to act in a co-housing project and what's expected of them and how they can use the common spaces and things like that. So it's quite a special situation with those. There are always 1, 2, 3, 4 persons, not more. Today I think it's 3 that needs help. This is in Sweden. You are not supposed to know about who is getting help, but of course we know everything in my house. And we also know because in Sweden, elderly care is a market, and in Södermalm where I live, you can choose between 100 different organizations who can help you at home, and they all have a name beginning with an A, so they are in the beginning of the sentence. Because we picked this list of 100 organizations, you get quite tired, but we talk to one another. So we know that Sabrina from that organization is the best one. So Sabrina is always working in our house.
She has a very good time when she goes.
Thank you. And so we are going. I'm the editor of a small journal called Bo Tillsammans Living Together, and we plan to interview Sabrina about how it is with home help in co-housing project.
Excellent. Okay, you first.
Hi, I'm Luke. I work at the developer here, graduated here from this story. I was wondering, how is the ownership organized? Because you said you had to call landowners and finally on housing negotiation.
This project where I live is owned by a municipally owned housing company. But also in Sweden, there are some cooperatives. But you know, in Sweden, cooperative flats are sold on the market. So we are not interested in Stockholm. We could have had the possibility to buy and form a cooperative several times, and it had made us rich. But we didn't want to buy the house because we think that people with no capital they don't have the possibility to move into a cooperative flats, and we wanted to have a greater mixture and be open to more than people with a lot of money. But in Sweden you can find both private property owners, a few of them. Nowadays there is a bigger interest among developers for this form of housing. There are many municipally owned housing companies engaged. They have one project. Could you say that they are engaged with one project? But still, they have one project, and then there are the cooperatives. A mixture, but we have this tradition in Sweden with municipally owned housing, and they did take an interest in the 80s and 90s, and that was good.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question now, and I know there are other people with questions. I would like to ask you to keep your question for the general discussion. We will have more time, of course, with all of them. Mishwa, introduce yourself. Can you stand up?
Hello, Brandy. I'm a PhD candidate in our faculty in 2000, and my research topic is also senior co-housing. But the senior co-housing in China, I hope to refer the senior co-housing, especially the experience of senior co-housing in Europe, and to maybe can improve the senior co-housing in China, the development of senior co-housing in China, because the senior co-housing in China is at a preliminary stage. So yeah, and I'm curious about one thing. According to experience, do you think the senior co-housing has its target senior group? Or in other words, do you think which senior group is more suitable for senior co-housing? For example, the senior people with certain financial ability, the self-care ability, and receive the higher education level than the senior group with poor financial ability. Yeah, do you think? I think not every senior people is suitable for the senior co-housing.
No, I don't think average senior people would like to live in co-housing, but many, if they had the possibility to try and or to visit us and learn more about it, because it's about like ordinary life, having neighbors close, doing things together. And it's not as dangerous as some think. It gives you so many possibilities, and you have always your private flat. You can always close your door. And in my house, we are not meeting one another so much in our private flats. We are meeting in the common spaces. And this functions well because you need this privacy. But of course, this is not a solution for all. And it's not a solution for those who want to live part of the year in another more sunny country. That's true. Then they go to a sunny country and they are part of a community of Swedes in that part of in Spain or somewhere else. But you since you can't take part in what's going on at home, this is not the solution if you want to be away for weeks, months, all the time.
It's not a timeshare.
Not a timeshare. No, it's not a timeshare. But as was said before, you need so many solutions because we are born babies, 50 centimeters long, the same weight. We are very similar when we are new. But after like 50, 60, 70 years, we are also different. So that's why you really do need so many different options for senior housing. And you need interesting options that could attract people, possibly make them interested in having a second half of life when you are doing things in a new way, when your children are grown up and you have time and perhaps hopefully resources to do more things. But doing it where you live together with others doesn't cost much. It takes time. It gives inspiration. And one of my friends living in the house says that it's important also that the children can feel that the parents are having a good life, and that they are not the only ones responsible for the parents' situation. So many have old parents living somewhere isolated and dependent on their children, but we are almost too independent.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kerstin. So
and I'm here to talk about a recent development or trend that has been coming up in Denmark, and that's about, Kerstin and Darinka mentioned that we have had co-housing for many years in Denmark, and also senior co-housing. But traditionally, co-housing means that, as we also heard from other presentations, that like bottom up, people, future residents go together and form visions and ideas for how they want to live later on, and they find a developer or housing company somehow and try to get that established. There are several reasons why there are pros and cons of this approach, you can say. What we have seen in recent years is that more and more professional developers actually enter this market and make developer-led, you can call it co-housing. And that, you can see that this has been like recent years, they've been presenting about 30% of the market of co-housing in Denmark, quite a big share, and it seems like that's just going more and more up. So this raises the questions: how do you form a community as a developer? How do you engage? How do you find the right residents to live? How do you facilitate the community? How do you design the buildings? And so on. There's a lot of questions to be asked about that. And we made a research project about that. It's the report on the right. You can see it's in Danish. So to get an answer to some of these questions, we were very curious to see how it progressed and what was the rationale. Also amongst these developers, what were their ideas about it. We tried to map all the new coming developer-led co-housing. We did interviews with the developers and investors and so on, and we did a couple of workshops also where we discussed these kind of questions, and we did some case studies where we interviewed the residents out in there where they lived. But let's just go a step back and see what is really the difference between the resident-driven co-housing. This is one like Kerstin just told you about, where it's where as residents stand for the whole vision and finding the principles for the community, formulating visions, recruiting other members to the group. And then comes the different questions about what about finance, what about the finding land, how about the building process? Well, then you often go and find a housing company or someone to help you get it built. And you have typically also a shared design process where the residents have their visions and the builder or developer comes with, going to discussion about the financing, etc., etc. And when the building has been built, then it's typically the residents who run it themselves, more or less. If we take the contrast here, or the other side of the spectrum, is that when we talk about developer-driven, is it that developer stands for these kind of visions or principles, ideas, and how to get the whole community started and so on, and for the visions, recruiting, and so on and so on. So, and to some extent, you involve the residents at some stage. Of course, you might do it before this help them get some ideas, or to get some ideas from how do the residents want to live and what kind of design do they want and so on. But mainly it's developer who's doing this. This is taken from an article based from Joe Williams, who wrote about American experiences. That's quite interesting to see that already, like 15 or 20 years ago, this concept has evolved in the United States. And it's the reason why we took this on as an inspiration was that it fits quite well with some of the same discussions that we're having with the Danish developer-led co-housing that we see today. There's also a partnership model you can see, which is probably the dominant model today, I would guess, because it's where you early on have a collaboration between developers and residents and so on. But in this study, we're focusing on the developer-driven co-housing. This is just to show you some figures about the development in Denmark about co-housing back from the 1971, where the first co-housing settlement was formed, up to today, 2021. This is number of dwellings established per year, and these are the intergenerational co-housing, where there's no selection of age; anyone can live there, And the red ones, the senior co-housing, and then we also have the communes and some eco-villages included because they see themselves as also including co-housing. But just very shortly, you can see that since the first senior co-housing in Denmark was formed around 1987, that's maybe more or less the same time as Kerstin's.
It was before. It was the first one in Denmark.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
But it's around the same time, this idea started to spread here, and we saw a very big development here in the around 2000s. And we see it went back after the financial crisis. And at this time, it also became more difficult for the bottom-up projects to develop because it's very difficult for quite financial restrictions for banks to borrow money to people who come and want to build and so on. And that's why I think this partnership model has probably grown from there, where you get investor and developer early in the process. And then here we are today in this period here, and there's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate about co-housing in Denmark, because people have realized, as the same arguments we hear today here, that a lot of people living alone in big houses, and they want to move before they get too old to some kind of co-housing, senior co-housing. And municipalities have found out that, well, this is maybe what we need in our municipality to get people out of the big houses and to live more tight, to get them a better health, live longer, etc., etc. So there's a lot of also on a national level, the ministries have has been formulated a national knowledge center for co-housing that will help residents and others to develop co-housing. So that's all happening right now. So there's very much demand on this. But this is the period where we see that those developers come in and establish co-housing here. This is just some key findings from this mapping that we made of this development here. We have about 400 co-housing settlements in Denmark, and the majority of these are actually senior co-housing, about 5,000 dwellings, a bit more. Even though we talk a lot about co-housing, it's only 0.3% of the whole housing stock in Denmark, and it's went up to 2 to 3% of new built dwellings. So it's big, but it's not. We still have to look in comparison to the rest of the housing market. Most of the types of building are row houses and dense, low building categories. And it's ownership, the non-profits housing associations are about 1/3. and 27% owner occupied. And then we have 26% of the cooperative housing, meaning that you buy a share in the building or in the community, and then you have the right to rent. So you decide, take all decisions, but you're still paying the rent to the co-op. And then we have 10% private renting. Most of the co-housing is located in the metropolitan areas or larger cities, and only 4% in peripheral regions, where we have the biggest share of older population. So there's a mismatch there, you can say. Recruiting from the same municipality mainly. As we also heard before, that it's people tend to stay local, and I think this also goes for these Danish co-housing. Many people also come from the same type of municipalities, and fewer come from make a big change, moving to the countryside or moving from the countryside to the big cities. So it is very local here. And just one thing. The residential composition in co-housing, intergenerational co-housing here, we took some key figures out and said how many people have big shares of long education, high income, have a job position as managers, how many couples with children, and how many have non-Western background. And as you can see, this intergenerational co-housing is really stand out compared to the national population. So there's a big overrepresentation of people with long educations, high incomes, high job positions, and so on. And that's what maybe gives this bottom-up approach a bit. It's selective, of course. You get the same group of residents more to a big extent. Whereas in senior co-housing, that's a bit surprise for us that so very few compared to the national level, it's quite fewer has a long education and high income. That's not a surprise because many people live on a pension and so on. But yeah, and this why do I mention this? Because this is when we have when we have the developers going in, they have an ambition to say we don't want to build only for this group here who have high incomes and long educations. We want to broaden it out so also people with lower incomes and not so high education have a place to a co-housing they can go to. Just a few words about the pros and cons that we hear about the developer-driven co-housing. I mentioned some before. The main argument is that the bottom-up process it creates a lot of, as we heard from Kirsten's example, a lot of shared understanding about where do we want to go and so on. The problem is it takes a very long time, and we see a lot of co-house projects that takes like 7-8 years to be formed. Some of them go down. And so that's why the developers say, well, when we can make faster and we can have easy access to finance, we take the risk instead of the residents take the risk. We have better opportunities to learn from project to project. These developers build that we talk to, many of them have concept, that they build the same type of co-housing in different cities. And they learn a little from project to project to make some changes and so on. Whereas as in developer or in resident-driven co-housing, you would start every project is unique. Because as we heard before, that people have different preferences and so on and design. So there's some questions here. And there's also an opportunity maybe for greater diversity. You can easily design different types of dwellings, large, small, and aim it for different types of target groups. As a contrast to the resident-driven, where you get typically also this very strong sense of community, but yeah. maybe also a more narrow group of residents. That's what we hear when we talk to the developers and discuss with them. Fewer conflicts between residents and fewer conflicts between residents. It says in both things. And I think that's a discussion about how do we see what does conflicts mean. Here, the developer says, well, we decide all the details about the design and so on. The residents don't have to argue with and get unfriendly because of that. They can just meet up and do some shared things and so on, so they don't have any conflicts. Traditionally you would say that, okay, if people are involved early in the process and discuss their visions and so on, they will, during this process, they will identify their conflicts and maybe, find out if there's things don't work too well, and maybe some will withdraw from the move out of the project if they don't feel they belong here, and that way you can get this conflict. So that's that's sort of like different approaches. But of course, you have all these discussions about the developer-led here, that you don't get to know the residents' preferences and visions and so on from the start. And it's also a question about who do we recruit for this co-housing, and also when do you facilitate the residents and the community, because you have to typically help the residents to form the community and some shared rules and understandings on how many things do we do together, how often do we, for instance, have dinner. These are some of the projects that have been this turnkey. Actually, the main three. This is called the Plus Houses. It's a big developer called Enrep. It's a Scandinavian developer. This is a Swedish concept that was Bovera, and that was imported to Denmark. It's a big block, with a glass roof on and a big palm garden inside the middle. Out here we have the dwellings, that's 55 in total. And people can walk around here and say hi to the neighbors and so on. And this is also a senior co-housing concept that was also built by a big developer, where it's a bit like the Bovera with a big garden inside. So and these ones are being built, several of them in different cities in Denmark. And this is the group of developers. You can say that the first group here is like these. You have traditional construction companies that also go into this area here and build co-housing. Then you have some very small and more specialized companies who are more like, on the process of helping people get along and so on, and have a quite different approach to this. We have pension funds coming up now with their projects. We haven't seen any yet, but it's just about to start. And we have the public housing associations, etc. So it's a quite diverse group of developers. We'll talk about that. This is a list of the houses or the settlements that are mentioned. It's, you can see that it's Bovera made some here from maybe 4 projects yet, and the Plus Houses, there have been built one, but they're coming up with more and more, etc. So, and when we talk to the developers about this, the baseline of this is that most of them want to build turnkey projects. They don't want too much involvement from the future residents. And that's, we can get back to that, but it's and they also say independent of each other, say we want ordinary people, and that's a bit contrast to the, we don't only want people from academia or long educations and stuff like that. And we want the whole community, we want that to be voluntary. It's not mandatory for you to have shared dinners every night. We don't want any mandatory that you have to participate in a lot of meetings and so on, because the argument is, well, this is not where the community is formed. The community is more formed around the spontaneous meetings and smaller groups of activities and so on. So that's their understanding of this. And this also means that the design of the buildings and the shared rooms is formed after that. I know my time is so I'll just finish. These are some key figures. What is different between the development and co-housing? Much more private rent compared to the overall co-housing. More smaller dwellings and larger amounts of dwellings in each co-housing settlement. Normally we have about 20. Here they have about 50. And also the type of buildings, more multi-story buildings, compared to and less single-family houses. There's still a big share of row houses, but not as dominant as here. And this year is because the developers also they make urban development projects where they put in co-housing settlement in the rest of the development to create some kind of shared sense. There's a general satisfaction when we ask the residents about this. They appreciate this this turnkey approach, but there's some challenges also. We heard about this. Kerstin mentioned what's the relation between as a renter. Do you have influence there and the owner? This is an example from one place where they have this room is too small. The shared room where they meet is too small for all residents. The residents are not too happy with that, but the developer says, we can't extend that. This is from another project from Plus Houses, a very industrial, very nice new industrial kitchen. But it's a bit difficult to get people to use it because it's voluntary. Who wants to cook for all the rest? Some of the people start up and form a group and say we'll do that, but they feel along the way maybe that it's not so many is coming to this shared dining, and you can't. A lot of people can come and eat, but they're not. It's not mandatory that they also do the cooking or the dishing or whatever. So that makes it a bit. And these are some of the conclusions. It's not, I think I mentioned most of them already. And this is an example from a new concept by a very big pension fund, Pension Denmark, who is going to form this approach or this line of senior co-housing as well coming up. So I think we'll see much more of that coming up.
We're also busy with this kind of approaches, so maybe I'm looking at you. I'd like to kick off.
The data is so rich. It's so nice to see because we don't have the numbers here in the Netherlands. So it's like, you have this information. But I was wondering what were the criteria for being professional in co-housing, being a developer-led co-housing, and in the county project.
Yeah, it's how can you say that? It was it's general knowledge from the market, I would say, and some companies popping up that you can say, okay, this is a new approach that we can see. But also your question, I think, also indicates that do we catch all kind of these approaches? I'm not quite sure we have, because it's popping up, and it's not always very clear when it's developer-led or when it's partnership model. But we have picked those ones that we're quite sure that we can say it's developer-led. It's developers who take initiatives and so on.
And a condition is like minimal common space, like outdoor or indoor. Or whatever.
Oh yeah. It has to be co-housing, and by co-housing we mean that you have your own flat, your own dwelling, but you also have some shared facilities for especially a shared kitchen. You also need some also the hobby rooms, meeting places, etc. So that's basically what it is.
Maybe my last question is how was the system arranged so many developers would get interested in this? Because here the discussion is mainly the costs are higher because if we have to make for the elderly, there are all kinds of conditions. Dwelling has to be bigger.
Yeah.
How did the Danish system provide this?
I think it started actually, as you remember, the development that we have after the financial crisis, there was very low activity. But then there's a private foundation called Realdania, who gives a lot of finance. They also finance our projects here, and they started a campaign for saying, okay, we need more co-housing, because they made some surveys that say that a lot of people, I think 80,000 seniors wanted to live in co-housing or something like that, and the market was not delivering this kind of, and to say, okay, something is wrong here. So let's get, they made a campaign where they funded some projects between developers, municipalities, housing associations around the country to try to get them into working with this and convince them about that this actually was a real market for that. And I think that really opens the eyes also for that, okay, we can do this, and that there is a demand for this as well. And this is what they say here in the pension fund. They also they say, wow, this is what really started this. So now we're there. Now we are also willing to put a lot of money into this developing senior co-housing. So.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jesper, for the inspiring presentation about the developer-led co-housing. My name is Marja Elsinga. I'm a professor of housing in this faculty. And I'm really interested in this role of the pension funds. I mean, it seems obvious pension funds interested in housing for the elderly, for co-housing. But apparently, I mean, we have a lot of pension funding in the Netherlands, and it appears they are more financial institutions, mainly interested in return on investment, spreading risk. So I was wondering, what is your experience in Denmark with these pension funds? What are their conditions for investing in elderly housing? And what are their considerations? How can you get them involved, and what do they expect and what not?
That's a difficult question. I just think that they have, you know, pension funds. They look, of course, for investments and where to put their money, and they realize, okay, this is a market coming up. We're getting older and older, and there'll be more, and as we heard, also more, you know, the public care, healthcare will be challenged, and we need some kind of new housing concepts to develop this. So I think it's both a financial, you know, narrow thing, and it's also some kind of looking at some markets. Yeah. I don't know that.
Yeah. So are they interested in societal return on investment? So not only financial.
You know, that's what they say.
That's what they say.
Pension fund would say that. But.
That's not what they say.
Yeah, but I think so. But it's. I think they are. I think that some of them, you know, it's not all things pension funds that do this kind of.
Quite similar to. Yeah. Thank you.
Stephanie.
Yeah, I'm interested because this is not a movement that is yet started in the Netherlands, and I'm wondering if there's a cultural aspect to Danish culture, that it's more embedded in Danish culture, that this movement is quite strong. And then in other countries, it's not that strong yet. Because I think every country is experiencing this aging society and a need for this. But I think, for instance, in Dutch culture, it's still kind of, there's quite a strong, and at least in my opinion, anti-movement towards the care homes, and this idea of collective living is associated with care or being very old and not. I don't know. I'm wondering.
But I think you're right that of course it makes it easier maybe because we have a long tradition of co-housing, and most people, ordinary people knows what it means co-housing, so they're not so scared about when senior co-housing comes up as a concept. They have some kind of idea what it implies. But also, just to build on that, it's very diverse what people think about when we talk about senior co-housing. Some have the idea of very tight communities, like Kerstin's, others have it just like, it's very formal, we just meet the neighbors, just a place to say hello and stuff like that. So when you recruit people to these co-housing things, you can have a mix of all, and that's very difficult for developers. They have to have some kind of, also be sure that people, what do you mean when you say co-housing? What do you mean when you say community? What do you mean when you say sharing? Do you really want to live here? Or are you just in for because it's nice dwelling and good location and stuff? Yeah. And then you talk as you think about what the developer wants to hear. But that was another aspect. But I think there is some kind of, it makes it easier, of course, to establish senior co-housing when you have this tradition.
Is it happening in the whole of Scandinavia or specifically in Denmark, you think? You have that data?
Those developer-led movement. No, I think it's actually starting in Denmark. What you have in Finland is a movement for co-housing from groups. So and especially in Helsinki and Helsingfors, and there are really multi-story housing projects who are formed by the future inhabitants. And that's a quite different situation compared to Denmark, who is low-rise mostly. And in Sweden, we are having those projects often in the cities and not in the outskirts of the cities, in somewhere, and the multi-story buildings. It's typical of Sweden, but not of Denmark. And indoor communication, because it's so cold and rainy in Sweden.
Running a bit late with regards to your program, but that's okay because we have quite a bit of time dedicated to the panel discussion where we can again bring up more input from the audience and questions. I just had one question to close off before we go coffee break. There's this cultural tradition in Denmark about the bofællesskab, the original co-housing, before it was even translated as co-housing in English, right? So this model of community-based living, which, as I understand, the original definition was we cook together, we eat together, and that's what binds the community. And then you say that these new developer-led concepts, they regard this as not necessarily, the core of the model. So I wonder, to what extent can we continue to call these new projects co-housing? Or shall we call them something else?
The first slide I showed you was the title of our report. And we didn't call it, we called it, I don't know how to translate it, but community-oriented types of housing. And the reason why you chose that title was because we thought that was really the concept more of this development, more than actual co-housing, So I think it's right that we have to start making some distinctions about this is not necessarily the same as traditional co. And we can see also that the developers, they don't always use their sell or promote the settlements. They don't call it co-housing. They call it, you know, it's a place where you can have friends, good neighbors, you can do things together. But nevertheless, some residents who want to live there, they translate that in their head to this is co-housing. That's right. And other co-housing projects, when people move in, they don't realize it's co-housing. They get surprised about. So it's a bit. I think also that one of our conclusions is that in this market, the developers has to be more clear about how they to announce what is the idea here.
The marketing, right? Yeah.
But again, that's difficult because they also say that, okay, once the residents move in, they have to form the culture and the visions themselves, you know? So it's quite a difficult, on one hand, you have to present what's the concept here, what is the community, what kind of things do we share? And on the other hand, you have to say, okay, once you move in, then you have to find out yourself. So I think that's a difficult balance for many developers, actually.
Well, that ties in very nicely with what we will discuss in our panel, also with Joop. He did a comparative study in his graduation on different concepts within the developer-led model. So maybe we can pick that up there. And well, thank you very much to the presenters. And now we have, let's give us some with 4 to 12 for a little break, and we can coffee, some cookies there.
The climate, of course, loneliness, and I think co-housing can be an answer for these challenges. Not the answer, but one of the solutions. And I think we need a lot of variety, a lot of forms of collective housing, and I also strongly believe in some light housing, co-housing projects. But maybe we can.
You're throwing in another concept there.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we can explore this light co-housing.
Yes.
We want to know more. How do you define that?
Okay, but I think.
Thank you, Yvonne. You.
Hi, my name is Joop Bastiaans. I graduated here. My mentors sitting on the other side. And I researched developer-led concepts here in the Netherlands, and I asked residents and developers how they perceive it, and I'd love to talk about it later on, about what my findings and what findings were. And now I work at developer AM, known from and I'm very interested in how to get companies speed up the process, and how can that also
And my name is Hannah. I don't know why you are differently in the panel. Anyway. Yes. My name is David Jurgenhagen. I'm an architect, and I'm working here as a teacher and a researcher, and I developed 5 years ago 2 courses, 2 master courses. One is Master 2, it's a short course, 10 weeks about co-housing. The other is the variation studio, in which the topic is designing for care for seniors, living concept for seniors and seniors who need care. And actually, in that course, my students live for 1 week minimum in an elderly home or nursing home, sometimes even on the department with people with dementia. They live there for 1 week before they start to design, which I find quite important. Getting to know people first, and then thinking about the space. With this co-housing, what I find very interesting is that some of my students do not talk about co-housing, but about co-neighborhoods. They make it bigger, which I find very, very interesting. And perhaps this has to do with the question they said, oh, if you have an app and if you can meet each other, you don't need to live in one house. You can live in small neighborhoods and you can find each other, which develops new neighborhoods. Or what I did in my last co-housing, last year, we had a transformation neighborhood in Moerwijk Zuid. They worked together with a housing corporation to step by step transform a neighborhood in which people can stay where they are and they want that, like in Frankfurt, people are very happy, so they don't want to move out, but step by step change, make more collective spaces, kitchens, gardens, and stuff like that. So my students developed, you could say, face by face system, strategy. Not so much new designs, but more strategies. So that's I find quite interesting going from co-housing to co-neighborhoods. Actually, and I just was in Japan, and there is one beautiful neighborhood. It's called Shared Kanazawa. It's in Kanazawa, which is a neighborhood which is developed. The money came from the government, and it's developed by a non-profit organization. And it's really a neighborhood with focus on we help each other. There are collective spaces where elderly can come, but families as well. So there are families, there are elderly, there are students, and it's organized like a co-housing, but it's a whole village. And that is what I would like to bring in, but we could even think bigger. Indeed. Yeah. Thank you very much. So Mirte.
Yes, my name is Mirte Sieksma, and I work now, this is my third week for Platforming in there, which is a knowledge work center, city and region. But I used to work before here for the municipality itself as a policy advisor on housing. And I find co-housing very important, and I'm also very interested in the role of the government in stimulating this housing forms. And I think it's very important that you have different kind of flavors for everyone, and for different kind of elderly, and also for mixed forms. So I'm very interested in how to stimulate these forms, what you do in municipality, what not do, and also about the voice of the inhabitants and the people who are really going to live in these kinds of housing forms. So that's my interest.
Thank you. Well, yes, we have done. And last but not least, I think you are very well known by most of us. You can still say, of course, who you are. But it would be very interesting to start with you. You're very well known for your, like, I would say, macro analysis of housing markets and housing systems. But I think very few people know that you also have a soft spot for certain community-led models. For instance, your work, yeah, a sweet spot. You work towards certain models that will work with elderly in this case as part of the solution for a housing crisis, and you work a lot with the Knabenhof as advisor for many years. So I'm very interested in how you see a connection between these big macro developments and this kind of approach, which is very often dismissed as niche, right?
Yeah, indeed, I have a soft spot on this. I started my research at the beginning of the 80s in Utrecht. I did some research on this, the students also. So it's coming back a little bit. It's always nice, but it's, yeah. So that is also a reason why I feel attracted to it. No, but indeed, I think we have big issues in society. Yeah? We have, of course, our housing issues, shortages, but also loneliness, etc., which are growing. We have even bigger problems. I really don't know how to solve this. I'm not an expert on it, but on the aging and care, it's unbelievable what's happening actually. And we had a general broadcast last week. Okay, we can't give care anymore. That's already happening now. So let's think about 20 years what will happen there. So it's an enormous effort we have to deliver. So that is a big reason why I think we should pay attention on housing and the elderly, collective housing. So we have these housing programs by filtering, what you mentioned, can use existing housing stock much better. we can do something on care, but also we can, yeah, there's a lot of loneliness, we know, but more people are living on their own, especially in cities. Yeah, I think if we have these kind of, yeah, and all, I agree with before we should, nurture all these kinds of initiatives. It's not, we shouldn't fight about what's the best model. So, your model is perfect in Sweden. If people really want to do that themselves, okay, but it is quite for the elite, I think. And yeah, if we want to do, if a developer wants to do it, also we should support them. We should learn from each other. Yeah, and I think so. Yeah, but the main issue is, I think, is how can we scale up? And I thought that Denmark was actually much further actually already. And if you have 2 or 3%, come on, it should be 20% increase. Like Amsterdam is now doing, 20% of new buildings should be collected, CPO or so how should we set up these new steps? And that is so important. And I think, yeah, with the Sklarov, I think that is also, if you have these partnerships, I think also could work quite well. So have some general structure in it, so that you don't have to, because yeah, that is also my experience. It takes so much time to do it from scratch on with a group. If you have some structure in it, and then you can organize a group, and then you can bring in your own desires from the group. And of course, all models should have some assistance, but I believe that these partnerships models, I also have benefits actually from both sides. And yeah, the main task is how to scale it up and how to. And yeah, we did some in the Netherlands, for instance, during the crisis, then we headed to Amsterdam where. Yeah, but also collective housing was also possible at that time. And now it's so difficult because of the money, of the area development and to bring these projects in.
But why do you think it's so difficult? Let's look at the Netherlands. What's going on? What I see is a lot of mixed signals from the government. On the one hand, we have the Minister of Housing, Hugo de Jonge, praising a publication on the Wooncoöperatie, the housing corporation, and the next month is spreading funding for one of the main catalyzers for Wooncoöperaties, which is Copling. And we don't have a national level guarantee fund yet, which was announced, and then there was a step back. So I see all this, the words don't match the action. So it's a political problem. But
I agree with, but I had, for instance, yesterday I was in the province of Brabant. The whole province has now a fund to bridge the gap between funding from the banks and so that's the whole province. So
it's a level of the province.
Yeah, some things are in 20 municipalities of Amsterdam, 50 million euros is available. So really things are changing, I think. And yeah, we have to say it loudly and clear. Yeah, so I'm not as negative as you are, maybe, but I think that things are changing.
No, not negative.
But I think that, yeah, and I think we have to celebrate also the successes. That's also important.
That's true.
Let's show what, yeah, and then
so you're positive.
I'm also positive. For instance, on the housing, I'm care. I'm not positive. I don't know if you want to or, but I think it's.
Yes, I do agree, because we have this big challenge. We have a shortage of personal staff, and we need to have this neighborhoods, this caring neighborhood, because we don't have enough personal staff to help us. So we have to prevent care, and I think we can gain a lot of efforts. We can make a lot of steps in preventing people getting ill, and I think co-housing and other ways of living together can prevent people who get ill. Like you said, people will live longer, and I'm very convinced that people will contribute to society, will feel they belong, and if people feel they belong, if they have a purpose in life, it prevents loneliness, it prevents illness. So I think we have to do a lot of steps.
like prevention, like more housing, a variety of housing. And we have to go to these caring neighborhoods and getting more involved of strengthening the involved network of people. But we have to be careful because a lot of people don't have a lot of strong network, and a lot of people are lonely. So we have to pay attention to the people with the poor health, with the poor network, and also with a small financial budget. And these people are not visible enough. And I think we lose them if we don't get attention to this. And I really agree, we have to make a change, getting this maintenance. People like to take care of each other. I'm convinced about it. I see it in the country. There are a lot of nice initiatives that people do lots for each other. And I think in your project also people take care of each other and it can prevent a lot of things, but we have to facilitate it more than now. And I hope it's so better. So yeah, we try to help each other to find the best ways to advance this. And I like the idea of diversity of models because indeed, as Kirsten herself said, this is not for everyone. I mean, to live like this is not for everyone. However, there are principles of this way of life that can be integrated in other ways of housing provision, right? But we wanted to touch on something which is actually a very critical point that often I hear as a criticism to, in general, collaborative living models, which is this is only for the happy few, this is for people with social capital, with resources, who can get organized, who can get this. How about the people who don't have financial needs, education, social networks? So how do we bring them in?
I think there's a really important role for the housing corporations. That's the south part is, I work with housing corporations and they seem to be quite scared of experimenting with these housing forms because of how they do the maintenance, how it doesn't work in shared space, who's taking care of that, who's paying for it, service costs we cannot give. We cannot charge the residents more service costs because the rent should be low. Fair point.
But they are a good example because in the last 20 years, quite some housing associations were at the forefront actually of organizing these kinds of projects. So yeah.
There are good examples, but it seems like every single housing corporation you speak to, they did it once, they don't know about how the other ones made it. They need to learn from each other, but they seem to be quite scared also because they've been very limited and what they could make the last 10 years.
That will change now because now they're not changing.
I feel like that sentiment is still there and they're really afraid to start going out and experimenting with new forms.
Do you think that there is now a new possibility or opportunity for housing?
Because they're existing much more nowadays, and they're also able to do more for legal concepts. So in the past, they were really in the corner, but now they have more possibilities. They also have, even for our ownership, they have possibilities. So their scope is broadened. So they have, so I'm quite positive about that. That they will become, that they could step in again.
There is a really positive move.
Yeah, of course. No, but and it's also political. If you talk to people in the street and also on this meeting in the street, then people really want this kind of
I think so, because I'm being devil's advocate.
I'm good.
You all know that I'm extremely positive towards things in general, but I also get sometimes frustrated by, as I said, these mixed messages. Well, when I talk about this in where there are Dutch people not necessarily involved in the movement, they say, but in the Netherlands we're very individualistic. And I want to know if this is the case. Is the Netherlands more individualistic than other countries, like in Scandinavia, for instance? Or
I think Scandinavia is more connected. That is for sure. But if you look at, for instance, France or Germany, I don't believe we are so interested. I don't believe that.
You don't believe that, yeah. Interesting. Hey, Maria, you also do. Yes, what do you think?
I was just listening and digesting that person your. No, sorry, no. About the Netherlands is more individualistic.
You're not sure in the sense that you believe there might be some truth in it, or?
I think I'm quite convinced there are more opportunities for co-housing, collaborative housing in the Netherlands to realize than is done now. So, and my main message of today was in the first presentation, the excursion in the bus. So I think in the Netherlands now that the elderly are living on their own, the care homes or many of them are closed. So the policy is to support them in aging in place. I know by experience, my mother-in-law, they're old and, you know, they're lonely, complaining, they need care. And then I think, oh, you're lonely. Your neighbor is also living alone in a big house, eating alone, and you bring them together. And then she said, oh, whoa, you know. And then she's going to a care home. And when she sees what it looks like, so she's living in the house with a garden. And what I learned today is showing them what it looks like to live in an apartment, to have communal rooms, you know, to show them, go there, smell there, look there, see how it works. I think that can make a big difference. And then, as you say, I mean, housing associations, I think it could be involved. Also pension funds. I mean, it's not on their list yet, but I think it will look, and I'm part of a think tank, 2040 in the Netherlands now. You know, it's installed by the VNP, the umbrella organization for municipal housing, thinking about the Netherlands in 2040, about the housing crisis and all kind of other crises we have. And I think care and housing for the elderly is a key topic. And I think therefore that the debate that you have on the table is really relevant. And I think it's a solution in the sense of housing crisis, care crisis. So yes, sorry, it's a long answer to the question. But I see potential, and I think it's really worthwhile also with what I hear today to bring it to the table in The Hague and to look at the barriers or that prevent people from coming together and create this kind of community.
But if you look at, for instance, Starbucks, they have 32,000 members. It's incredible. It's incredible because nobody knows about it. So every municipality should have at least 2 of its bar offices. At least. If you have so many members, it's people like Zwolle, they came from Amsterdam, they came from different areas. And yeah, the demand is there. The only thing is how should we organize it? And break through these barriers, which are yet. And more and more politicians are also want to change also. So that's the reason why I'm quite positive.
We should say the demand is there. That's also like important what your study showed.
Yeah.
How come that we're still living
Because it turns in the way we organize the building process, the way we organize finance, etc. Then that should that should be changed.
Let's bring people from the audience. Can you speak?
Journalist. I'm Jan Wijnands. I'm architect in Utrecht. I really I'm designing buildings. And I want to turn it. I think you said there are some major issues like care, like sustainability, housing. We need these projects. This is the only way when to make the first road. So between the market and between the government, there is a need for a third road because the scale of the problems is too big for those two. We need the first road. There's not a choice, it's necessary. We have to work together. And working together is co-housing.
Yeah, otherwise models that we like to call, let's say, collaborative. There's the board cooperation, there's the economic, there's the others, there's variety. But basically what you're saying is that the groups of residents organized and sharing spaces, sharing activities, that's the way to go. And that, whether it's in social housing or in the development-led housing or in the self-organized cooperative, it doesn't matter. I agree, Kirsten.
Because I think that the
space is an important factor. That somewhere to live. Locally, very in the vicinities and in the neighborhoods, you need places to live. No app can substitute people meeting face to face, discussing, finding things they want to be together. So how can we put small but beautiful meeting spots in all the old neighborhoods to make a start? Because there are people, there are ideas, but there are nobody. And so my recipe would be just put down beautiful, nice, meeting small places all over the neighborhoods and see what happens. Because they will be needed in the future. We need places where we can do things together. Because we have really big challenges in the future. And we need to talk and better work.
But you don't believe in apps? No, but I believe in apps. I think that is a very nice. But also
places where make an app when what is happening where it's not bad. I mean, not for everybody, but you can have a blackboard as well. Yes, old-fashioned blackboard. Actually, I'm quite convinced that people live longer, are happier. My concern is the care. As you said as well, you have home care. We have that system in Erasmus as well. And I realize my students very often ask in their interviewing the elderly, what are you willing to do for somebody else? And it's doing shopping for somebody, it's cooking, as well as was a care component, washing somebody, helping them in the clothes and so on. You don't do that every day for your neighbor, and I think this is a problem. I'm not so positive about that in the future. I think we have to keep healthier by this co-living, but the care component will be a problem solution. And that's not something for the developer or for the housing corporations, it's something for the government.
We as a society to see how we organize it, right?
But we see, some of the pension funds here also will start to think about this, providers, health providers, care facilities. They can see that. But I would see, if you think about this, does this mean also some kind of segregation in the population, those who can afford access to this, they move into some co-housing because it's nice care facilities can go over
One big difference between Denmark and Sweden, because most co-housing is really they are rent. They are for people where rents are high and rising, but still they are open for people with no capital. And that's important. So there is a difference, and you can draw other conclusions from the Swedish situation. And that's why it also would be interesting to compare two countries, our different ways of doing things, because they are different and you can learn different things from them.
How is the interest these days from the municipal housing companies to include co-housing groups in their stock? We have had some conversations in the past, and apparently, from what I understand, there was a period where they were more open to work with groups of residents, and today that has declined. How is it going?
Yes, it has declined in Sweden because the municipal housing companies have to be competitive on the market, and they have to follow EU rules. And we have no subsidized housing in Sweden. That's not true. But we have a lot of subsidies going to people owning their homes. That's subsidies. So lots of money goes to them, and we pay rent, we pay like 200 or 300 euros more each month for the same area. And it's deeply unfair. But since the majority of Swedes at the moment own their own homes, they are not so interested, or we are not interested in during election times because we are not the majority. And that's also dangerous. So the Swedish system, as I see this, is deeply unjust, and no one can see it. No one sees that how unjust it is. It's always natural to have capital and own your own home. And this is a bad situation, as I see it, because we can't solve problems when people are not realizing the real problems. But still, I think it's important to give old people the possibility to do things together and to decide together. And I think perhaps that our need of care will be less if we have come together and do things together and that we can keep fit longer and perhaps die faster. So old when we are really getting sick, yes. You can't say that now. There are no studies actually about what it means to live alone or have a company and do things together. There are really no good studies. There are some in Denmark. And that shows that people who have not as high incomes as everybody else, but doing things together, they have a bit better situation. So I think that every wheeler you could say, giving older people the possibilities of living a better life, they are not. I think, but we are also interested. We are like we are some flash actually.
Yeah, but it's very difficult to say here, but it's outsiders problem, and on the inside they are the majority, and they don't want to change everything. So it's very difficult to handle it. But I think the positive element is that also from other areas like care, like pensions, etc., there's much more force and to change the system and to make it organize it, because it's not only about housing, it's about care, it's about how to organize your pension system, etc. Now, if you get support from these areas also, it's easier, I think, to change the system. And in our country, we have still very big and powerful and rich housing associations. So they can do this.
They could do so much. But in Sweden, they have been focused on the migration and all the immigrants coming to Sweden, although that situation and the need of housing for people from other backgrounds. So that has taken the interest away from and in Sweden, we are always discussing the situation in the country. They can't find anywhere to live. And no one is actually seeing how that there are so many older people that would have such a much better situation. They were thinking about movies, if there were flats and houses to move to, because there's nothing to move to actually. And it also turns out that the whole sector where you buy and sell flats and houses, they are not interested in those people. They don't see them as customers. And those people are not used to be on the market in Sweden. To find a solution. So the whole system is looking at young people and their needs, and they're not seeing, and the whole system are from politicians to the housing sector and everyone else. So there need to be changes. I think they are possible too. But you have to all time give these good interesting so for sure, but it's possible. And to learn from other countries is also a way of understanding that there is more than one solution.
And then we share a lot of the problems. Yes, and this is also why it helped these three countries. We see a lot of commonalities when we understand what's going on with the relation, demographics, care, housing markets. Now it rings the bell a lot when you say we focus on the young, that they cannot access the market, and then we're not seeing that the caveat going the market. In these countries, we see, and the whole discussion on how our project started was with this push. The media, for instance, they were being rather aggressive in saying that all people need to leave, but that was not the right way to approach the situation. So we felt, okay, instead of pushing people, let's show people what are the possibilities. And we saw with this very little study that, yeah, can completely change people's preparedness to live differently.
I would like to hear a little bit more about this lights.
Let's hear about the light lights.
Which was this very neighborhoods, because I think that you don't, some people are very suitable for projects like your beautiful cars projects. I'm convinced that a lot of people would like to live there. But some people are better off in situations where there is more privacy. And I think if you have a neighborhood with a lot of streets and 25 persons meet each other in a nice place, in a library or for a church, they can form a community as well. So they don't have to live in one building, but they can form a community while they are living in different houses. But I think a lot of people like to share services like laundry, like parks, etc. And also younger people. There's a lot of movements of young people who like to share things. So I think we have to construct more forms of forming a community, of sharing things, doing things together, and not always in one building, but also in streets. Similar to your idea, and I think that's also a solution to this care problem. I'm convinced that a lot of people, while they are aged 90 or almost 100, can do a lot of things themselves with a little support, and it doesn't have to be very superb care, but honest care. And I'm convinced that a lot of people would like to do that for each other. And sometimes an app is helpful, but I agree with you, it cannot replace the contact. You have to have this nice conversation, these nice spots. So this is the light version, is to form a community while not sharing a building. Perhaps something about the app, a light app. There is a village in Germany where there are apartments on the third level down an elevator. So the whole building arranged a stair app. So if a lady of 90 wants to go to the hairdresser, she puts in the app, who can help me? Because I do not dare to go down around. And well, there's always one neighbor, a student or a woman or whatsoever working at some project in there. It cost me 5 minutes to help this lady downstairs. So the stair app was very, very helpful for this community, but it can be very difficult. And this and the solution of personal electrical housing technologies. There are a lot of other things which can help. We need a lot. Yeah, and more intergenerational projects. I'm very jealous when I saw the numbers of intergenerational projects, because we have some intergenerational projects in the list, but it's not as we need. And I think there's a lot of interest in this kind of project. So I hope that the amount of intergenerational projects will increase. And there, in the audience, there is Jan sitting. He has a wonderful idea to dividing homes, splitting homes. So the older person with a bigger house, the younger person with a big house would like to share the spaces. You can divide the house in different rooms, so you can
rented to with young students or people who need it. And I think that's a nice solution. And there are a lot of other nice initiatives in the Netherlands, like students who live in nursing homes, or students who live with an older person who has a very big house, or groups, different target groups who live together. And I'm very enthusiastic to see all those initiatives in the country. And it's the amount and the variety of all those types of housing is really increasing. It's too slow, but it's happening. And I think we should make it more visible, and get enthusiastic and nice bus tour to all those projects. But also politicians need to see it because it's there, and we have to read this. I love your enthusiasm. It's contagious, and definitely. Well, many of you know that for over a year we've been working in the context of Project Together in, first of all, mapping exercise, both in other European countries, but also in Netherlands, to really count and bring together all the different initiatives and all this variety of the people working collaboratively, to live collaboratively. So I using the opportunity to tell you that we are always looking for data owners, as we call them, so people in organizations who have this data from their own projects, community, because we want to improve the quality of the database. So that's the first thing, to have good quantitative aggregated data that gives an idea to policymakers, to decision makers, what is going on. And the other aspect of it is a qualitative understanding of what is the demand and also what is the supply. Because what are all the different models that we can see emerging in the Netherlands. We do that also with our partners in the European Adaptive Housing Research, the researchers working on this in local countries. But I think in the Netherlands, if we want to, as you're saying, we want to really show the politicians that this is actually happening, that this is a demand from the people. It's not an exception, it's not a niche, it's something that more people are embracing. Then we can, I think, have an impact and build on this positive sense that there is stuff happening. There is some stuff happening, but it can be much more. So this is where I see the role of research, and we are sitting here in our university. That's what we do, right? That's our core business. But for this, some people really rely on also the input from the people who are in the practice, because otherwise we don't have data. So it's very important for us to keep in touch and to keep each other updated, and we can work in tandem to advance the movement. I think we touched on many interesting topics. I wanted to go back perhaps to the developer level. And we have Jesper here, and we have also you who is working now as a developer. How do you see the prospects of this becoming more of a mainstream product, let's say?
Good chances. As I said, also, it seems like when we talk to developers and see what they have in the pipeline, they say there's good demand for this. Their rate of, when you measure on the rate of people out, is much lower than traditional, buildings. And I mean, but it's still in progress, and so finding out what kind of benefits do we get from what the residents get from they pay typically a slightly higher rent living there, but can be convinced that they get more benefits from them. And I think also this conservatism that we hear, which definitely also is standard. When you ask people who want to live in co-housing, most people say no, that's not for me. But when you see a co-house settlement established in there close to where they live, and the municipality or developer calls for an influence, then a lot of people show up and say no, and they start, probably also women who go there and they try to bring them in. So I think that's, and it seems, but we don't know that yet if the residential composition is more spread out. I think it is. I think there's some chance there, but I also share the viewpoint that we should be careful not to say that co-housing is the only solution to this, because we can't build ourselves out of this. That's my We have built some, but we have a lot of existing buildings that we have to build. You know, we have some smart apps maybe they can evolve something. Facebook groups come from, and that also makes it a big difference.
So when we talk about the development, we talk about movement. Because the big thing is about movement.
Almost all those. Yeah, it's 99.9. But we need, of course, people who work in the response to start to play. It's not all this way. More co-house, which is satisfied. But then we run into a lot of new challenges about how can we transform these existing buildings. Actually, the very first senior co-housing settlement that was made very much and the student housing settlement.
I think we have to have not only for so everything that now we can by single possibility and we can help them formulate ideas and what to be done. So I think asking them was a big difference. And that they can organize events and activities that make them interested in what's going on. You can try to say that they will have 20% in the payment. We have to I do think there are we could have made them interested in this because I think they're going to do something together with people. With the people.
Yeah, some of the new the concepts that we see before, they have local managers who enact or the hosts, you know, try to make arrangements, activities and so on. They they always make coffee and share rooms, so if you drop by, probably have a chat. I think that's and when we talk to people, they're very happy with this arrangement. So I think that's right. But the question is, if we want to put that into existing housing system, then
But I'm a little bit skeptical about how this works because the market comes with a solution for the hours and which are nicely organized, but you're also buying products and I think from the evaluating the expectations of people buying product are so different. So I'm not really pay for it because I never really use it. It's like a side step. Well, in the partnership model that you described, then residents and developer are really
connected.
And more connected to the needs that there actually are. But I don't actually have the same analysis in these.
Yeah, but I think that's both models have their rights. And, it's some people like to go in what you get when you move in. Yeah, and some people move into co-housing and said we never thought of co-housing before, but then we saw this nice place and we went around and talked to people with something.
We had one project in Sweden that we also visited an excursion, and there was a community manager at first. But then after a couple of years, or even 1 year, the residents came together and they said, actually, we don't want to have the community manager anymore. So they just, that's it. They kept space. Yeah, I think one important thing, and I know it's only a Dutch problem, and so that also something in Rotterdam in research, is that when the developments and neutral community managers, such a certain group of people and takes charge and can become a bit more exclusive. That's one consideration that I think depends on the culture of the group if community management is needed, or if the group has such a strong culture that they can manage that in the project. I guess it's probably necessary to have a community manager.
You have 80.
We have. There's some, I know some social housing complexes, they have this owners committee. It's like a group of residents who say, okay, we're gonna helping manage the spaces. And then they become this kind of, yeah, like a group that takes charge. The others feel a bit intimidated.
I think it's clear from the beginning that there is roles that you have to pay for it, and that's the one organizing. I think that's fine. That's maybe a more light version. And but if the presidents and say, no, we want to do it ourselves, then yeah, it's nice to be this partnership. Although there's a freedom to have both options.
But how is it organized in your sense?
Yeah, they also, I think when these concepts are more market driven, often there's more like a hosting because there's always the guarantee that this community space is to be paid. So then somebody cleans it and you don't have to organize it out from.
So they get to use the space, they can organize stuff themselves, but there's a top-down cleaning.
Yeah. And they're not the owners. And I think what's nice in Canada, for example, is that they all do it themselves. They do it together. Then you sort of need to collaborate also. But you need to know at first that this is expected from you, because otherwise you get these different expectations, and I think that's bad for such a project.
Yeah, and you get the free rider.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah. But I'm positive. I think you see what 10 projects, municipalities, several parties hand in, for example, when we work together in neighborhoods, we try to find the local stadsmakers and give them a place in the link, and especially for these bigger projects, there's on making neighborhoods and these small scale projects on plots.
Yeah, in that sense, there is co-neighborhoods or co-villages, however you want to call more the neighborhood level. If you go to German-speaking countries, we see a lot of very nice examples of co-housing that or cooperative housing that is more integrated with the neighborhood. And Stefan has also research on this. You have worked in Zurich, and I'm sure many of us know about, for instance, Mehr als Wohnen is a very well-known project. I personally like it a lot because if you don't know it, it's I don't remember how many 8 buildings. They are cooperative buildings. They have been co-designed between the residents and the architects of their choice. And in addition to their own building, the different cooperatives, which is in one building, they co-design and talk together about the spaces in between and the plinth, the ground floor, what they want to have, the mixed use, and a number of also sustainability initiatives connected to for instance, the grid or energy grid of the city. Maybe you can talk more about it because you've been doing that for a while.
I wanted to return the question a bit about this neighborhood corporate.
Yeah.
These meeting places. I was wondering if anyone in the panel has an idea who should be the initiator or also maybe owner of that. Is that a municipality? Is it a neighborhood cooperative that should organize themselves? How could you make such a space in a Dutch context?
Yeah, because it's very context specific how these things are initiated and run.
I think in some countries, for instance, and I think we used to have it in organized by the municipality, these meeting places that we don't pay €4 for coffee, for instance. In those places, I think we gain very much pride about there. And also because of the prices, the budget costs for municipalities of the neighborhood centers disappeared. Yes, there is more strong need for it now. I'm wondering, I don't think it is the municipality that they can provide for it. So who should be, is it the developer responsible for making such a space in every project in a large development?
Well, I think the government plays an important role in that, but it doesn't have to be that the government is doing it. I think it should be a cooperation between developers or housing associations and the government. Maybe the government can make sure that maybe it's subsidizing it or facilitating it. I mean, it would be nice if the people own it themselves. I think it is really. Because could also be, for example, in public space, right? That sometimes it's very simple that the neighborhood says we just want a few benches at the playground where we can watch our grandchildren playing and have a chat, and others coming there. So
it's very important to listen once and then, well, if it's necessary, you can support it as the government by funding it or maybe it's not only to place the benches and it doesn't have to cost a lot. Shooting together, and I think definitely the government should play a role in it.
And I think maybe also in this housing associations could play a role as well, because you very often see that some plans are also are used for many different purposes that don't have a housing destination. So they're more flexible and actually sustaining or like stimulating this kind of neighborhood initiatives, because I think in general there are plenty of people who actually want to take care of that, but there's very little like space for releasing in a more privatized sector for these kind of things. And what I also heard before, but I don't know how it's going to happen, that for developers it's not very lucrative to actually have more like social function in the place, because then they make less money with it. So I don't know how you deal with that. And I think that the developers are actually quite tricky to involve these kind of like it would be great if you go do that with the government, but I'm not really sure how
it always sounds really nice in the beginning, and there's the
Yeah.
project 5, and then there's 5 years and it's not working. What should you do with it?
Yeah.
And the investor rather says, okay, but I want to turn it into a dwelling. And that's exactly what the community doesn't want. So I think you really need this, maybe like if it's stated in the, I don't know, really like this cannot be, exactly. Then you have to organize it up front, because if you, leaving up to the market, that's the solution you get.
In Copenhagen, the municipality asked developers who make large development areas to say you should put 1% of your investment in the possibilities. So they have to do that, and they are thinking now, considering several of them is thinking, how can we form that? How can we organize this shared facilities? Should we do all the things, or should we let the residents form an association and let them run it? So I think it ends up many times with a combination of where the developer provides the physical facilities and takes care of cleaning and basic stuff, and then the residents needs to form some kind of association and that kind of stuff.
Model that we haven't discussed here this morning, but that comes to my mind, and I'm also involved with this, is the community land trust. Many of you might have heard, which actually operates on a wider neighborhood scale, and it combines in its governance the residents, the local government, and other stakeholders with a local interest. It can be the business community, it can be, local organizations. And the trust aims to maintain affordable housing at perpetuity. That's the definition of a community land trust. And also the decision making, because it involves all the relevant stakeholders in that particular area, the decision making involves this kind of initiative. Say, okay, are we going to have, for instance, a community infrastructure that we want to keep up and dedicate to certain purposes? So, of course, every CLT is different depending on the local context. And now Amsterdam is trying to get their first community land trust off the ground. But I see this as a possible way of getting this type of say spaces, and I can talk about space not only in physical sense, it can also be a hybrid space where you combine apps with a physical space, but at least to have the notion of a space for community to meet. That doesn't require a big investment. It can be something like also in terms of a pop-up, for instance, and our friends from the placemaking community are also busy with understanding how can we collectively make our public spaces more livable and more attuned with the needs of a certain community. So I like the idea, and I think it can be implemented in different ways without, as I say, putting the burden on one particular actor, because that clearly in the past has not worked. But we can find new ways to deal with it in a more lighter way. I think. Life is bigger.
Legacy example, which also very interesting. We have it for art, you have to spend certain percentages on art. If you do everything, why not have an system like then make it.
I think what you now see is that it also is scattered. There are so many different varieties because there is no national regulation on how we should do so. You get the developer, you get the communities wanting to spot better municipality. And then the alderman has to choose which group he favors for the school building. Like, and what I heard from your story is that the Green Bay and there are clear subsidies and there's a clear national program. I think that would really help to drive it, to scale it up. But I don't know how it started, but I think it would be really good if there is a national plan.
But I think, of course, we have to always create evidence that the benefits that we get from the co-house and other institutes, and that's tricky somehow. Because it's not always that the co-house lives up to what we expect. I have to accept that and see how can we improve the co-house concept.
But you also, we have national subsidies now for the cluster content. That is good. So yeah, same use. That is good. Starting.
They see also other conferences like it's all.
Yeah.
I think it's positive, and I don't like to wait for the day. Of course, it helps, and on Friday, I believe the plan from the minister will show up. I'm very curious about it, but I like to see in the neighborhoods, in the villages, initiatives of the people themselves. And I strongly believe that it's sustainable if people feel they own it from them. And I'm very convinced that it will remain future-proof. So, and when you are asking, should we have who owns this public spaces, or is it the municipality? And I think, well, you should. It's important that it's run by the people themselves with some support. Sometimes a degree of professional support is needed. It depends on where in the neighborhood. Is there a lot of carrying capacity in the neighborhood, or is it a weak neighborhood? And can we offer the people, can we strengthen the talents? Because every person has a lot of talents, and sometimes you need to support it a little bit. And Monday, the day before yesterday, Monday, I met a wonderful project, the Almere's House in Almere, and it's an initiative of the people themselves for a housing project for people, for young people with a mental disability. And before they are building this wonderful home, they ask the neighborhood, what do you need in the neighborhood? Can we make a contribution to the neighborhood? And they say, we like to have a place to meet, because in this new area, there is no place to meet each other. So this wonderful living project will have a communal space, and the neighborhood is involved. And in the beginning, they were a lot reluctant, because they didn't know people with a mental disability in our neighborhood. But then they met each other, and the neighborhood were very enthusiastic. And now they are developing together this common communal space. And I think it's important to ask the neighborhood what's needed, what do we need, what can we contribute. And I think a lot of collaborative housing projects make a possible contribution to the neighborhood. And I think that should be also become more visible. Keyword. So I would like to give the opportunity to people who have perhaps been a bit quiet, and if they want to have ask a question or give a comment, an impression before we close the session, please feel free to please say who you are and then tell us.
I'm Jan van der Veer, I'm the person from the initiative to start supporting elderly people who have a house with more space than they need to split up stuff. We have potential in Holland of about 500,000 houses that could be used. Could be still stimulated, I think. That's all I wanted to contribute. I think what I see, it's also from Peter, what you tell about members that are other people that are interested in crowdfunding. Why should not the central government give that type of wishes come very clear that it should just be supported on every municipality with budgets so that they can start making those good neighborhoods in there. That's the same with the idea that people don't want to live in communities, but they want to, they prefer to stay in their own house where they have raised their children, where they have their own community, and give them the possibility to make that house first help them improve for themselves, but also create a house for a student or a start with a house. And also the other topic that I was a little bit the discussion here on the table about how should we support the community and what type of should we need community builder or the one that facilitates the common place. I think we should really go back to the strength and the weaknesses in the communities themselves. Look like a normal sports club. I'm a member of a tennis club, and it's always you should have the bar services. You could take someone who will do it for the members, and then at another moment say, no, we have bad experiences, so let's do the bar services ourselves. And I think it's really that this should be something by the community themselves to support them. And if they come up, of course, to the professionals and to the scientists and so on, there will always be problems. I think one of the first things may be best to do to point those communities with their problems to other communities and show them how they have solved the problems, so that they should, especially with this type of practical problems, that they start helping each other to how in your situation. And that's also what you say, take the elderly people to the places where they can meet and see how other types of living will be. I think it's the same with the communities, just to take them to other communities so that let's see how they have solved things that are struggling with consequences. That's what I would mean.
Thank you very much. It resonates very well with the many of the points we've discussed. It's very clear. Who else would like to say something? Ask something. Looking at you, you look like you want to say something.
This is very inspired by all the different solutions and you know it's talking about splitting houses and think of housing growth and multi-generation in quite in Utrecht, where we have this type of house that is around for grandparents and living in typical areas of families, and that those kind of elderly people, they are really like a grandpa of the whole courtyard, you know, all the kids they call their kids, continue with living. And that is what I just told you as well, is the brain that is kind of top-down project. So also the people have to really figure out how this works to live together, how to share things. That was kind of difficult to start, but now they have all these committees like girls in clubs and the task and care and they cook for each other as a baby. So it's really nice to see how they develop, but it is also the educated people, I guess. But it's really nice to learn. What really works nicely is the diversity of houses there. So you have this big camper house that I just explained. That could also work maybe in parents' houses. So it would be cool to develop that. And we also have a 40 square meter park in the same community. So I really like double different housing types. Attracts a lot of different people. So yeah, that was really appreciated by the group. also think that we got. Then what I also like, you were telling about the top-down project, that there is this kitchen, and that people like, yeah, I will use it as this professional kitchen, community space, this one. And in this project, we designed all the houses and made it really diverse. But the shared spaces, they were not done yet, so they could really, they got a budget and they could really design it themselves according to we want in this space. They use parking for kids and then a problem drinks and a big table, so they that made it their space. And that is still empty, and then together we do it. So that little things in my mind, especially by others different things that we got to.
So I think that was the idea, to inspire each other with concrete examples, new approaches, new methods, and how we can advance all these variety forms that ultimately, as I said before, we pursue one goal, which is to satisfy this change in societal needs for care, for mutual support, and for inclusion, etc. That we all have more and more. So we need to find new solutions. The samples are not so new. They have been tried and tested in many places, but we need to scale them up to make them more of a part of the solution of this big crisis that we are experiencing. So, well, I think it's time to end now, but I would like to thank you all for your contribution, your presence, your good energy. And as I said at the beginning, we're going to be in touch with this briefing in Dutch and in English, for you to spread the word and, well, keep in touch with us. We continue to do some interesting research projects, writing about it. So we're very happy to hear from you if you have ideas, you want to collaborate in one way or the other. And I wish you a good afternoon.